Monsters, particularly those of the humanoid variety, have long captured our imaginations. Whether we are fearful, intrigued, or full of admiration, or maybe some fascinating mixture thereof, they certainly have our attention. But why is that? What is it about monsters that keeps us revisiting these stories time and time again? Stories of monsters are a direct reflection of humanity at the time of their creation. A portrayal of our fears, our felt experiences, and our longing for connection. This time of year is always fun for me because I can kind of parade around my interests without a lot of side-eye. Nowadays, loving horror, not really that big of a deal. But, as I said in my last video, I grew up going to Catholic school, so self-expression was rather limited. A lot about horror movies was seen as blasphemous or straight up inviting evil. And I mean, don't threaten me with a good time. What? Horror movies have been one of my core interests for a couple of decades now, and I think about them a lot. And, like I tend to do with all of my interests, I will inevitably smush them all together like the Frankenstein's monster they truly are. Luckily, this just so happens to be a much more natural intersection of my interests, as horror and the human mind are intrinsically linked. Obviously, horror is a broad topic. As far as genres go, it is one of the most diverse. The overlap between psychological concepts and horror is certainly not going to be a one-off for me. There are certainly a multitude of avenues to explore in the realm of horror. But for our purposes today, let's take a look at monsters, and what is it about them in particular that keeps us so engrossed? We'll be using the universal monsters as a framework here. Not all of them. I know there are more, but folks, I really need a cutoff, or I will fall down a research rabbit hole, a hole that is second only to a black hole in its ability to crush the light out of you. Lots of folks have a favorite monster, just maybe not from those 30s, 40s, and 50s universal iterations, i.e., are you Team Edward or Team Jacob? Any The Mummy 1999 Imhotep fans in the house? And don't even get me started on the book talk girlies. You know who you are. Personally, I'm a Frankenstein devotee. And yes, I will absolutely be using the monster and Frankenstein interchangeably in this video. Bite me. I know there are folks who really want me to say the monster or Frankenstein's monster every time I say it. But how many of you have actually read the novel? See, I personally couldn't get through it. Shelley, darling, I'm sorry. I will try again, I promise. But it's just not the version I clicked with. And frankly, I could have done without 90% of Victor, you know, his immense affection for his sister and all that. Even the film changed Elizabeth from his sister to his fiancé. The novel iteration of the monster is wonderful. Without it, we would not have all of the adaptations that followed. But personally, Boris Karloff is my monster. Or Herman Munster. And even aspects of the super unusual depiction in 2004's Van Helsing. I did say aspects. But there's just something about Frankenstein. From the verbose novel to the outlandish depictions on displays of commercialism this time of year. Frankenstein taps into something. Some deeply held sentiment. And it goes without saying that I am by no means the only one that feels this way. We've had tales of monsters since we've had written stories. And if you think our love affair with monsters is a thing of modernity, look into any region's mythos. In the modern era, these stories have transformed, with the central messages going through an Animorphs-esque transformation, much like our ever-evolving societal fears, expectations, and norms. Before we dive into the Black Lagoon that is our love of monsters, I have to address something. There's an undercurrent to frankly most of these films that can't be ignored. Most of these films are deeply troubled in one way or another. So I want to make it very clear that I am not signing off on the misogyny, racism, or cultural appropriation present in these films. So if this video makes you want to check out these films, I want you to be forewarned. Most of these films have moments that are insensitive. Even this video will contain some cultural hinkiness. I will point these things out as we get to them. But I hope it should be obvious that these things are not okay. The misogyny present in these films has been discussed before. These films certainly perpetuate the trope of the scary, dangerous man softening over that one perfect woman. The doe-eyed beauty who becomes the obsession of a depraved and/or misunderstood man who is then dragged into events that she did not want any part of. Oh, joy. Thanks. I hate it. Good night. And yet, we're not going to dismiss these films outright. because a lot goes on beneath that murky surface. If we allow ourselves, there are messages in these stories that are feminist. And horror is also deeply, unequivocally gay. I would love to do an entire video on the queer history of horror. So if that's something that interests you, let me know. And if you have any other suggestions for video topics, please leave them in the comments below. With all that said, intro over, let's begin. As previously stated, monsters reflect the anxieties of the times in which they were written. Mary Shelley wrote Frankenstein in a time where bodies being stolen was very much a reality. It was a time where science was advancing fast, and in a way that gave a lot of people pause. Reanimation was an avenue folks were actually trying to go down. And while I try to look at things from the context of their times, I'm still not quite sure if they thought about the implications of their research had their experiments been successful. Suffice it to say, maybe let's not. And had Shelley and I existed in the same timeline, I would have absolutely idolized her. In a 2016 article for The Conversation, Leo Braudy writes about the types of monsters that came from this time, of, as he puts it, aggressive modernization. He states that the fictional monsters created during this period can be categorized into 4 types. Each corresponds to a deep-seated anxiety about progress, the future, and the human ability to achieve anything like control over the world. Oh, humans, we think we have control. How sweet. Braudy characterizes the monsters into 4 types. 1. The monster from nature, representing a power that humans only think they have harnessed, but haven't. An awesome abnormality that we can't predict and scramble to understand. It strikes without warning. For our purposes today, this is the Gill Man, or as others might call him, the creature from the Black Lagoon. The flaws in our thinking that we can control nature, tame it, use it for our advantage, is the source of ruin for this expedition.
Well, anytime you're ready, Lucas, we can start back.
Mark, we're not finished here yet. We've got to make a study of that grotto. We've got to collect photographs,
I've
data.
got all the proof I need. Get going, Lucas.
Mark, we're not going anywhere until we've finished our work.
They argue about whether or not they should leave this land alone and just go home. And I mean, they could have. Braudy's second type is the created monster. As Braudy states, it is the monster we have built and believe we control until it turns against us. He elaborates that these monsters' ability to become too human is threatening. Here, we're talking Frankenstein's monster, obviously. Thirdly, we have the monster from within, which is the monster generated by our own repressed dark psychology. The other side of our otherwise bland and blameless human nature. We're looking here at the Wolfman, who arguably may also fit into the 4th category in iterations where it's some kind of ancient curse, but the universal Wolfman is also absolutely the monster from within.
It shows the wolf in the pentagram, the sign of the werewolf.
Werewolf? What's that?
Oh, that's a human being who at certain times of the year changes into a wolf.
You mean runs around on all 4s and bites and snaps and bays at the moon?
Oh, even worse than that sometimes.
Lastly, we have the monster from the past, who, like Dracula, comes out of a pagan world and offers an alternative to ordinary Christianity with his promise of a blood feast that will confer immortality. Like a Nietzschean Superman, he represents the fear that the ordinary consolations of religion are bankrupt, and that the only answer to the chaos of modern life is the securing of power. Ooh, that definition! It's gorgeous! Here we're going to be looking at both Dracula and the Mummy.
In the interest of science, even if I believed in the curse, I go on with my work for the museum. Come back with me, and we'll examine this great find together.
I cannot condone an act of sacrilege with my presence.
Similar in the fact that securing of power extends to securing the object of your desire. You know, the trophy wifey. It'd be nice to think that we moved past this view of monsters, but not at all. We might not view the universal monsters this way, but we definitely view other monsters these ways. Interestingly, our monsters of nature are now often played for a joke. Even our natural disaster films are often over-the-top Hollywood blockbusters that fail to show the weight of human suffering. We want to believe we have conquered nature, but I think not. In a 2022 interview from NPR, Aisha Rasko spoke with Colton Scriver. Scriver is a researcher out of the Recreational Fear Lab at Aarhus University in Denmark. So, I'm definitely gonna need more information about what goes on in that lab. Anyway, their conversation focused on why we love horror, and identified 3 types of horror lover. 1, the adrenaline junkie. 2, the white knucklers, or those who use these films to test themselves and learn from their fears. And 3, the dark copers, which is a title that sounds like it comes from a horror movie in and of itself. But the dark copers are those who use these films to face existential struggles and difficult emotions. I am somewhere between a 2 and a 3, but if I'm being realistic, I'm a 3. They also go on to discuss how exposure to fear in controlled ways is healthy and can serve as a primer for us to face our fears later on. This fascination with monsters primes us for threats. We have to avoid the unknown, for it could be dangerous. Now, don't go into that lake alone, or the sea serpent might get you. People who look differently from us may harbor diseases. And don't trust that handsome outsider. It's a trap. And well, our brain's oh-so-lovely negativity bias works overtime here. And while these situations are often not dangerous, sometimes they are. So operating under the assumption that there is trouble keeps us alive. All animals hold the capacity to be entirely unpredictable. We think we've identified a pattern, and then one individual does something that leaves us feeling like, what the hell was that? Horror helps us cope with that. If we can blame some shift, some curse, some disease, maybe then we can explain the issues of humanity. If there's an explanation, maybe we can have control again. 1941's The Wolfman is the ultimate monster from within. Early on in this film, we see the man who will transform being an absolute creep.
What I'm really looking for is something half-moon shaped with spangles on it, golden.
Oh, I'm sorry. We haven't any like that just now.
Oh, yes, you have. Don't you remember? On your dressing table up in your room.
In my room?
Throughout the film, a poem is repeatedly recited, one you may already be familiar with. Even a man who is pure in heart and says his prayers by night may become a wolf when the wolfbane blooms and the autumn moon is bright. Excuse me? Pure in heart? Where? Anyway, the Wolfman is a representation of that secret part of ourselves that we fear to reveal, for it may be dangerous to ourselves or others. Many depictions of the Wolfman show the transformation to be painful, with the human self being terrified until the wolf self takes full control and unleashes its power. Many depictions show the man who transforms desperately searching for a cure. Most end with the Wolfman dead, as in 1941's The Wolfman, or with the dying of the life the Wolfman wanted, as in 2004's Van Helsing. The queer allegory here should also be obvious. The hidden self, the self that is more confident, is hunted down and forced to conform or die. That being said, there is also the mental illness angle present in The Wolfman.
Doctor, do you believe in werewolves?
I believe that a man lost in the mazes of his mind may imagine that he's anything.
Can these sick people be cured?
Not they. An asylum's the only safe place for them.
Any disease of the mind can be cured with the cooperation of the patient.
Ah yes, the cure for mental illness. Cooperation. This is something that people absolutely used to think was true, and unfortunately some still do. Simultaneously, the film depicts a much more insidious idea of mental illness. That someone who appears normal cannot be cruel, sick, or dangerous.
The wolf must have attacked her, and Larry came to the rescue.
Werewolves are pretty cut and dry to me, for they are the ultimate portrayal of the shadow self. The things we may do if we are not in full control, if we let that facade slip. The shadow self is a Jungian concept. Carl Jung states, "It is a frightening thought that man also has a shadow side to him, consisting not just of little weaknesses and foibles, but of a positively demonic dynamism. The individual seldom knows anything of this. To him, as an individual, it is incredible that he should ever, in any circumstances, go beyond himself. But let these harmless creatures form a mass, and there emerges a raging monster, and each individual is only one tiny cell in the monster's body, so that for better or worse he must accompany it on its bloody rampages and even assist it to the utmost. Having a dark suspicion of these grim possibilities, man turns a blind eye to the shadow side of human nature. Said more simply, we are not only capable of making mistakes, but of committing horrible acts. We like to believe that we're in full control, that we would never do anything outside of our nature. When we get together, however, groupthink takes hold, and we can commit atrocities.
But if a man isn't even thinking about the thing, isn't interested in it, then how could he hypnotize himself with it?
It might be a case of mental suggestion plus mass hypnotism.
You mean by that he could be influenced by the people about him?
Yes.
We are aware of this on some level, but it's easier to ignore that shadow side in order to keep it light. The denial of the shadow self is, however, the problem. You cannot understand and deconstruct a reality which you refuse to acknowledge. Instead of recognizing and saying, I know collective anger can feel validating, but maybe let's not listen to this siren song because it's a trap, we dissociate during that warning and eventually crash right into the rocks. Like the Wolfman, 1931's Frankenstein also has the mental illness angle. However, this time it's structural. The opening of the film sees Fritz grabbing the abnormal brain after dropping the normal brain. The audience has been given a description of what exactly makes this brain abnormal in the scene prior.
And here the abnormal brain of the typical criminal. The scarcity of convolutions on the frontal lobe as compared to that of the normal brain. And the distinct degeneration of the middle frontal lobe. All of these degenerate characteristics check amazingly with the case history of the dead man before us, whose life was one of brutality, of violence and murder.
Well, kinda? There are structural differences present in certain disorders. But criminal brain? I'm gonna take issue with that. As a whole, our society is much more focused on retribution and justification for it than on rehabilitation, and that helps no one. Even the classic example of Phineas Gage has other evidence to suggest that these structural differences don't make that much of a difference. The story of Phineas Gage is one you love, or at the very least you love the easy narrative it provides. The man has a rod blasted through his skull, and the once kind and competent worker becomes unpredictable and full of rage. That's not necessarily the case. There's other evidence to suggest he went on to live a fairly normal life before dying of seizures. So, in these criminal brains, are these abnormalities found because we go looking for them after we see behaviors that we don't agree with? Is any given individual's brain more like that of the average person or of a criminal? We won't typically know the answer to that. People often interpret the scene where Frankenstein and the little girl are playing to be the inevitable showing of his dangerous side. But I always thought it was an accident.
Would you like one of my flowers?
We see him throwing flowers into the water with the little girl.
See how mine float?
And then he picks her up and throws her in as well.
No, you're hurting me! No!
Thinking she would also float. He had no malice towards the little girl, so why would he intentionally harm her? The message here, for me anyway, is that the road to hell is paved with good intentions, that curiosity is dangerous, that there will be no room for explanation when tragedy occurs. I see the monster being similar to Lenny from Of Mice and Men here. not as a brutal killer, but as oafish and confused as to the consequences of his actions. Wrong is still wrong, regardless of the intention, but there are certainly degrees of wrong. And the monster did not deserve what he got. Prison? Maybe. A secure psychiatric facility? Well, okay, in the 30s that would have been maybe worse than prison, but maybe now that would be more appropriate. This brings us to Dracula. The power we want and fear. The confident Casanova we want to be and be with. At least at first. 1931's Dracula, starring the inimitable Bela Lugosi, is the model of all modern iterations of Dracula.
I am Dracula.
Mind you, the film was based on the 1897 Bram Stoker novel of the same name. But when you picture Dracula, you picture Bela Lugosi. Or Gary Oldman, but I picture Bela Lugosi.
Children of the night, what music they make.
In the 1931 film, Dracula states,
There are far worse things waiting man than death.
Here we see Dracula with a pained smirk across his face. Is it a lament? Is it a warning? Is it him having a sick sense of humor? Yes. Yes to all. How we view this expression is largely dependent on how we view Dracula, which is what makes Lugosi such a legend. Dracula reflects the Victorian fears of the other, of the past, of disease, and of course, of sex. So, I have a bit of a crush on the creature from the Black Lagoon. Hear me out. His modern iterations are easier to explain. I mean, Abe Sapien from Hellboy, or The Shape of Water. Come on. Del Toro just gets me. The human woman with the monster man trope has luckily, can I say that, become much more palatable in modern renditions.
Normally I'm able to read others quite quickly, but I've never met anyone like you.
No, I like you.
Okay, I know Princess Nuala isn't exactly human, but it still counts. But it wasn't always this story of mutual respect and longing. And we'll get to the romance, I promise. But I also want to talk about the general longing for connection. 1935's Bride of Frankenstein is without a doubt the best of the Universal monster films. Yes, that is my opinion, but my opinion here is correct. For this film contains the relationship between Frankenstein's monster and the hermit.
We shall be friends. I have prayed many times for God to send me a friend.
Tears, every time. Because that's the crux of it, isn't it? This man's desire for companionship, it's a stake in the heart. The need to connect with others is what drives the human species. Moreover, the monster is only seen by the blind man, with the hermit going so far as to say,
I shall look after you, and you will comfort me.
Because ultimately, grasping the humanity of an individual goes far beyond the senses. We have a way of knowing beyond all of them. Can I put this knowing into simple terms? No, but it is a sense of shared experience. The sense that someone can relate to you just by the way they are. Now, the typical 5 senses do work together in forming this other sense, but it does feel separate. The metaphor of being seen is genuinely spoon-fed to us, with the hermit going so far as to say,
hast brought 2 of thy lonely children together, and sent me a friend, to be a light to mine eyes, and a comfort in time of trouble.
And then spanning over to the monster crying. But maybe heavy-handed metaphors can be forgiven in a film from nearly a century ago. The theme of needing connection continues as the hermit tells the monster,
Before you came, I was all alone. It is bad to be alone.
And as the realization spreads across the monster's face, he reiterates,
Alone. Bad. Friend. Good.
But this budding friendship is not meant to be, and the longing for connection must continue. Their cozy home is busted into by hunters that have been trailing the monster.
Look, it's the monster.
And when the chaos starts, the hermit states,
Why do you do this?
Is he talking to the hunters, the monster, or all of humanity? Again, yes. Why do we act aggressively, jump to conclusions, and ostracize those we deem different? As the monster leaves the hut, he cries out, friend, searching for the buddy who was just whisked away. It's such a stupid, simple moment. But if you've ever been the person who's been left behind or left out, it hits you deeply. Initially, when they go to make the bride, the monster states,
Friend. Yes. I want friend. Like me.
But strap in, folks, because this film is about to take a hard left turn. But before we get to that, monster sex.
I bid you welcome.
Dracula is all sex. I mean, there are other themes there, but does anyone ever focus on them? The love octagon is a major focus of all iterations, including the original novel. In the film, we see that Harker wants Mina, the brides want Renfield, Dracula may also want Renfield, Lucy wants Dracula, Dracula wants Mina, and Mina wants Harker. It's a recipe for pearl clutching. The 1931 Dracula is also unquestionably queer. We see him wave his three brides away so that he can drain Renfield. Renfield then becomes mindlessly devoted to Dracula and absolutely loses his shit when separated from him.
Who wants to eat flies?
You do, ya loony.
Not when I can get nice fat spiders.
1932's The Mummy is essentially just Dracula set in Egypt. But we need to talk about it anyway. Heads up, this is the film where the cultural hankiness comes into play. Karloff is an Englishman portraying an Egyptian mummy. And there's a servant character known only as the Nubian, which is not great. Not to mention, Karloff took all kinds of problematic roles in his time. But for our purposes today, we are keeping it on the monsters, for I am tangent prone. The Mummy from 1932 is simultaneously wildly different and exactly the same as the 1999 film of the same name. The largest difference between the two mummies is that Karloff is eloquent and disturbing, whereas Vaslu is pretty much a himbo. We are entranced, but ultimately spooked by the 1932 film, but largely feel bad for the 1999 version. They have the same quest, but it's clear that Karloff is nuts.
No man ever suffered as I did for you, but the rest you may not know. Not until you are about to pass through the great night of terror and triumph, until you are ready to face moments of horror for an eternity of love.
Dramatic, but cursed love has a certain appeal, but hopefully one that we all outgrow. Imhotep is desperate to reunite with his long-lost love, and assumes this young woman, Helen, is her. And in the film, she is the reincarnation of her, but the point remains that Helen does not want this.
No. No, I'm alive. I'm young. I won't die. I loved you once. But now you belong with the dead. I am Anxanaman. But I'm somebody else too. I want to live, even in this strange new world.
Reasonable, but Imhotep is all,
For thy sake I was buried alive. I ask of thee only a moment of agony.
die for me! Mind control ring! I see why they changed it up in the remake. But it doesn't make quite the same point now, does it? Congrats! 1932's version was somehow more feminist than 1999's. In a way. And it even passes the Bechdel test. If you count women discussing makeup to impress a man, which I don't, but it's the closest we're gonna get. I'll take it. I'm not exactly happy about it, but a goddess statue did wreck Imhotep shit at the end. And that's pretty cool. When we are not distracted by the lusciousness that is the 1999 cast, we see the mummy and all monsters for what they truly are. Incels. Really? I guess we're going there. The notions that monsters as a whole are incels is not a new idea. I mean, when I first had it, I thought, I wonder if anyone said this before. And of course they have. Everything is a thing. See my further viewing section in the description to see how quickly I humbled myself after outlining this video. People have been calling Frankenstein's monster an incel for years. But it isn't just Frankenstein's monster. It's all of them. No, really, all of them. Except maybe Dracula. But Dracula's red-pilled. What the hell did I just say? The Bride of Frankenstein has the most unhinged incel bullshit of all of them. First of all, the bride only appears in the last 5 minutes of the film. And this scene exists.
Died 1899. Madalena Ernestine, beloved daughter of...
Oh, never mind that. How old was she?
Aged 19 years, 3 months.
Moments later, Pretorius then sits and has a drink with her skull.
I give you the monster.
Yeah, that was weird even then. We can't use the whole different era excuse. In a moment of girl power, the bride does not like the monster.
She hates me, like others.
But then the monster loses his goddamn mind and offs all of them for him not being loved.
You stay. We belong dead.
I mean, yeah, but can we consult with what used to be Madalena for a minute here? Now I'm going to read the primary source later. It's in my to-read list, so this quote comes to you straight from Wikipedia. Cue the wrath of scholars in 3, 2, 1. In her book, The Monstrous Feminine, Film, Feminism, and Psychoanalysis, psychoanalyst Barbara Creed provides a feminist reading of classical movie monsters like The Creature or The Phantom of the Opera, arguing that despite their superficially masculine characterizations, their antagonization of a powerful male hero instead positions them as opponents of the patriarchal social order, thus imbuing them with feminine traits and creating a sympathetic connection between them and the women they victimize. Okay, I hear you, but powerful male hero? If anything, these male heroes are generally inept and swoop in at the last possible second. And most of these films end with the couple safe, embracing, or getting married. This is not exactly challenging the patriarchal order. But weirdly, there is still a sympathetic connection between these monsters and the women they victimize. Is it because these films were written in the 30s, 40s, and 50s by men? Probably. But it also has to do with the fact that women do not want what men think they want. Also, I want to revisit Creed's work at a later date. We seem to have similar interests. Creed is so onto something with the whole saved us from the patriarchy idea. I mean, the monster's a brute, but he'll save us from being a sad little trad wife. The monster is unconventional and allows us to live a different life. Maybe not an ideal life, but a different one. There must be more than this provincial life and all of that. And Beauty and the Beast is the most obvious example of that whole what women actually want versus what men think they want thing. As seen in all the gals, gays, and theys who are upset when the Beast transforms from the Beast into a prince. Or yes, the Gilman's revivals. Princess Weeks and Lindsay Ellis both have videos covering the more amorous side of these topics. Links to both in the description below. Their videos also explore the hidden and not so hidden racism present in these tales, at least their earlier renditions, including my beloved Gilman. As discussed earlier, the Gilman is a depiction of the unknown, of the untamed, something strong white men should protect their women from. Ick. Again, let's take a moment to appreciate Del Toro fixing up our hunky amphibian. The romantic interest piece of horror is frankly always a disaster. And while I know the story and understand the plot, I still want the bride to love the monster. Because I just do, okay? And that's how most folks remember the story. And in this instance, I prefer the misremembering. Otherwise, Frankenstein is an incel and the world is horrible. After all that discussion, do I still love monsters? Damn it, I do. I wrestle with it though. Because it's not just our shadow selves represented here. It's the collective shadow. And that makes me queasy, because that's, frankly, a mess. We want answers. We want easy explanations to the horrors in our lives. We want to externalize those parts of ourselves that scare us. And I get it. It is often easier to explore these things through metaphor or allegory. My plea is that we never limit our discussions to the films. That we continue to use these stories to voice so much more. It's safer for us to say Boris Karloff is a genius, when what we really want to say is that Boris Karloff perfectly depicted what it is like to feel isolated. This should not mean that we agree with the monster's actions, but that we see our similarities. Our love affair with monsters may ebb and flow over time, but it always comes back in some way, shape, or form. We seem to be heading out of the demonic house / poltergeist revival that we have been dealing with for the past several years, and I really hope that continues. Horror is one of my favorite ways of telling stories. So if y'all have any good recommendations, be it TV, book, or film, please let me know, okay? And drop it in the comments below. Until next time, stay weird, and happy Halloween. If you made it all the way to the end, thank you. As stated in the intro, this video is dedicated to my uncle and to my grandfather. My uncle's favorite book was Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. And no shocker here, he loved this time of year as well. My uncle and my grandfather were the unabashed weirdos in my family. And through their example, I became comfortable with my own weirdness. My grandfather, uncle, and I shared a love of film, dark humor, and creepily reciting The Raven. I try to do them both proud through various means, including, but not limited to, talking about my parasocial relationship with ghoulies from films 100 years ago. Part of me wanted to scrap this video because much of what is in it has been said before. But this is not a dissertation. This is a video essay, and I put my own spin on it. I will continue to challenge my own discouraging thoughts, and I hope you will do the same for yourself. Until next time, be kind to yourselves, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.